No Time to Die is the 25th film in the unkillable James Bond franchise, a history that spans 6 decades and has many 007s, filled with trend-setting fashion and badass cars, sex symbols and shameless sexism, jetpacks and boombox rocket launchers, trips to volcano layers and space cities, and just a stupid amount of bad puns. Yet it was all built on a novel that could never be properly made. After a bizarre detour in the 1960s, Casino Royale in 2006 fulfilled a 50-year pipe dream of finally adapting a book lost to rights holders and lawyers. It was a long, arduous mission, classified as a shit show. Ian Fleming wrote his first novel in 1953, titled Casino Royale, and it introduced the world to the British secret agent, James Bond 007. It was a small success, enough so that CBS paid Fleming a mere $1,000 to adapt the book for their anthology series, Climax, in 1954. The 1-hour episode was mildly faithful, hitting mostly the same beats. Bond is tasked with beating the villain Le Chiffre in a card game to reveal a wider conspiracy that includes his love interest. It was performed live for TV and starred Peter Lorre as Le Chiffre and Barry Nelson as the American spy, Jimmy Bond. It was Bond's first on-screen appearance and isn't remembered much beyond that. Maybe besides some thrilling moments of Baccarat.
All right. Three at the bank. And 4.
That next year, Fleming sold the film rights to Russian actor-director George Radoff for $6,000. Radoff's production never made it to the table, and he died in 1960. His wife then sold the rights to a Streetcar Named Desire producer, Charles Feldman. Fleming continued to write more Cold War adventures for 007, inspired by his years as a naval intelligence officer for the Royal Navy. Fleming's Navy buddy, Kevin McClory, saw the potential of the James Bond character, and together they started work on a movie script. Again, nothing materialized, so Fleming adapted it into his 9th Bond novel, Thunderball, giving McClory 0 credit. McClory rightfully sued and won. It wasn't until early 1961 that Bond hit the jackpot. President John F. Kennedy revealed in Life magazine his 10 favorite books, and it included Fleming's 5th novel, From Russia with Love. James Bond sales skyrocketed. Canadian producer Harry Saltzman jumped at the popularity, buying the rights of every current and future Bond novel that Fleming wrote, aside from Casino Royale. Then Saltzman partnered with fellow producer Albert Broccoli to form Eon Productions. Its sole purpose? To make James Bond films. The pair wanted to start with Thunderball, but the legal troubles with McClory made it a messy situation not worth solving. They decided on Dr. No, the 6th book. Most studios didn't want to fund the film because it wasn't American enough. But United Artists bet that with a flat $1 million, they could make it happen. But that meant Eon needed to make it on the cheap. Saltzman and Broccoli wanted Cary Grant or David Niven to play Bond. Yet any mainline star would be too expensive, so they cast an unknown Scottish actor, Sean Connery.
I love the ground she walks upon, my darling Irish girl.
With a screenplay and a director set, production was all in. Meanwhile, Casino Royale rights holder Charles Feldman wasn't about to live and let die. During that same time period, he lined up one of the biggest directors of their generation, Howard Hawks, and had a faithful adaptation written by prolific screenwriter and playwright Ben Hecht. They even were in talks to get Cary Grant to star. However, things were taking too long, and Dr. No's production wrapped insanely quick. Feldman and Hawks were given an early print of the film, and after seeing Connery's Bond, Hawks folded. Dr. No released in 1962 and debuted to a mixed reaction from critics, but it was a resounding success with audiences, making nearly $60 million worldwide, off that measly $1 million. While it's definitely of its time and the budget really shows, it followed the book fairly closely and established so many trademarks of the James Bond series that continue today. The card playing, the evil layers, the cars, the chases, the puns.
I think they were on their way to a funeral.
The girls, the gun barrel, that theme. And of course, cementing Connery not only as Bond, but as the epitome of cool.
Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
United Artists and Eon Productions easily had a franchise in the making. Eon dealt 2 more sequels in 2 years, From Russia with Love in '63 and Goldfinger in '64. Debating the next film, Eon entered talks with Charles Feldman to make Casino Royale together. However, Feldman wanted a preposterous producing fee. Realizing the world was not enough for Feldman, Eon hit the ejector seat. A burned Feldman then secretly met with Sean Connery to see if he'd join his film, Betraying Eon. Connery wanted a then unheard of $1 million to do it.
Shocking. Positively shocking.
Feldman couldn't make that work. Eon, on the other hand, had successfully negotiated with Kevin McClory to make Thunderball, bringing him on as a producer. Thunderball released in 1965, becoming the highest-grossing Bond film to date. An exhausted Feldman threw out dozens of drafts of Casino Royale, including one written by film royalty Billy Wilder. He instead pivoted to making a spoof/satire of James Bond, since the spy genre was now so immensely popular. And things quickly turned around. With no official script to speak of, Feldman ran with one idea: that MI6 would start calling all of their secret agents James Bond to fool the enemy. He hired 4 directors to shoot simultaneously, including the legendary John Huston.
He gave me 4 scripts to read, and I said to Charlie Feldman, "Where's the book? Let me read the book." And he said, we can't use the book because they've used sequences in every other Bond film. He said, "The only thing we've got left is the title and the casino." There it was, and Charlie said, "Well, look, you write the last third of the picture. Now, how do you get on a picture and get that?" He just said, "Treat this as a psychedelic movie, 4 directors doing 4 different segments, and treat it as fun," which is what we did.
All of a sudden, Feldman had a full house of talent. Peter Sellers as a decoy Bond, Orson Welles as Le Chiffre, Woody Allen as nephew Jimmy Bond, David Niven as the original Bond, one of Eon's choices, and even Ursula Andress, the actual Bond girl from Dr. No. And in 1966, production on Casino Royale began, and things instantly spiraled out of control. Casino Royale's production was an embarrassment of riches, with lavish sets, a Burt Bacharach score, and a clash of overbloated egos running wild. The worst of it was Peter Sellers and Orson Welles, who were both notoriously very difficult people to work with, as they were jealous of the other's success and were absolutely savage on set. Sellers hired Dr. Strangelove co-writer Terry Southern to rewrite only his lines, as he wanted to upstage Welles and Woody Allen. And rumoredly, Sellers wanted to prove that he could pull off a serious version of Bond in a comedy film. Welles, in return, demanded that his Le Chiffre remain seated and performed magic tricks, forcing set changes. Every day turned into passive-aggressive dickishness.
That's finished, is it? Oh, fantastic. Wonderful. Incredible. Absolutely marvelous. I've never seen anything like it.
Until Sellers forced Feldman to have them shoot their scenes separately. Even then, Sellers would disappear for days at a time, while Welles would take to drinking champagne all day, turning the set into a drunken party. Nothing would get done. When a fed-up co-director, Joe McGrath, called out Sellers' attitude on set, Sellers punched him in the face, and they were friends. McGrath quit, and Feldman was left with finding a director that Sellers would approve of. Eventually, Feldman fired Sellers before finishing his scenes. Woody Allen was given free rein to write his own dialogue, and the ending was thrown together last minute just to get it all over with, leaving co-director Val Guest to cobble together a narrative from the mishmash of everything filmed to that point.
And it was at the end of the film when all these things had got together and they've all been edited by Bill Lenny, my editor, who had done his best. Charlie Feldman said, "Well, it sort of somehow doesn't make sense." I thought, "Man, that's an understatement." And he said, "It needs a sort of a storyline going through it." Now, this is a hell of a time to think of that when you've just made the film. And I said, "Yes, it needs a thread going right through all these sequences."
Guest wrote and shot a handful of scenes to fill in some holes. The only thing really connecting it to the original novel is that Bond goes to a casino, plays baccarat with Le Chiffre, and gets tortured after winning. All told, 6 different directors would go through the film. The shoot went from 8 weeks to 8 months. It would cost upwards of $12 million, making it the most expensive Bond film, and the stress gave Feldman a heart attack, and it was the last film he would make. Casino Royale shuffled to theaters in April of 1967, and by luck of the draw, it was a small hit. However, it's nowhere near as funny as it thinks it is. The film wastes all that talent for drawn-out scenes of unrelated nonsense, sex jokes, excuses for more famous people doing walk-on cameos.
Excuse me.
Are you Richard Burton?
No, I'm Peter O'Toole. Then you're the finest man that ever breathed.
And not nearly enough of this guy crushing it.
We've checked it out, sir. International Mother's Help is a smash cover operation, sir. It supplies babysitters and au pair girls to some of the most important families.
Why are the black flags there?
They've been liquidated, I'm afraid, sir. Finland, stabbed to death in a lady's sauna bath, sir. Madrid, burnt in a blazing bordello, sir. And Tokyo, sir, garroted in a geisha house. And to think that you knew Mata Hari, sir. She really was one of the greats.
It was all but forgotten by the time Eon's 5th Bond film, You Only Live Twice, hit screens in June, which is remembered for the wrong reasons.
Now what's the plan for me?
First, you become a Japanese.
You will be a poor Japanese worker with humble Japanese wife at your side.
A year later, Charles Feldman died, and the rights for Casino Royale went to Columbia Pictures. James Bond and Eon Productions went on to have ups and downs through the next 4 decades. George Lazenby served Her Majesty once.
He had lots of guts.
To mixed reviews, before Eon got Connery back for one more. Then Roger Moore donned the tux for 7 films, reaching peak camp. Fleming died in 1964, Harry Saltzman would leave Eon in 1974, and the quality of the films would bounce around rapidly, and Bond's popularity would taper off considerably by the mid-80s. Then there was the matter of Never Say Never Again in 1983. A rogue Kevin McClory produced this virtual remake of Thunderball for no reason at all other than the fact that he still had the rights to the novel. The non-Eon production stars a clearly older Sean Connery, who was given a stupid amount of money and creative control. Eon sued the living daylights out of McClory to keep it from being made or released. While they were unsuccessful, the film isn't fondly remembered or considered part of the James Bond canon. Timothy Dalton would suit up for 2 Eon films and was set for a 3rd, but MGM Studios, who bought United Artists in '81, fell into a black hole of legal madness that no one has patience diving into. And Dalton's contract expired.
What happened?
He got the boot.
Once solved, though, the 17th Bond film was announced in 1993, but Albert Broccoli was ready to pass the torch. He made his stepson Michael G. Wilson and daughter Barbara Broccoli the heads of Eon Productions. But by 1994, the world had changed. The Cold War was over. Critics questioned, was Bond relevant?
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
Wilson and Broccoli showed that with the right hand and the right star, Pierce Brosnan, James Bond could be timeless. Directed by Martin Campbell, GoldenEye in 1995 was thrilling, sexy, and after years of seemingly being on autopilot, confident. Despite more Baccarat, it revitalized Bond for a new generation. And really, GoldenEye 64 also had a lot to do with that. The 3 sequels that followed became increasingly more expensive, attempting to up the ante against CG-filled blockbusters. Brosnan's last, Die Another Day in 2002, was the highest-grossing entry in the franchise, but it's often pointed to as the pinnacle of Bond absurdity. The invisible car, the ice palace, the race switching? Oh yeah, and Bond surfing a tsunami to outrun a space laser. Eon realized they wrote themselves into a corner.
From the point of view of Barbara and I and our writers, it was very hard to continue down that fantasy style of filmmaking. And we really had to reconceive Bond.
Complicating things further, 3 highly successful Austin Powers films made the entire series an outdated joke.
In Japan, men always come first, women come second.
Or sometimes not at all.
As a stopgap, Eon had their writers from the last 2 films, Neil Purvis and Robert Wade, develop a spin-off for Halle Berry's character, Jinx. Then the turn. Kevin McClory reared his ugly head once again, and he wanted to double down on another remake of Thunderball, this time with Sony Pictures.
We're not seriously going back there.
I wouldn't dream of it.
MGM sued, won, then paid Sony, who owned Columbia, for the film rights to Casino Royale. At long last, Casino Royale was with Eon Productions. Ironically, Sony would purchase MGM outright in 2004, bringing everything under one roof anyway. Unfortunately, Albert Broccoli died in 1996, never pulling that trump card. His daughter called it her father's holy grail, and she saw it as a great time as any to start fresh with James Bond. In early 2004, an extremely unlikely candidate emerged asking to make Casino Royale, Quentin Tarantino. Hot off his Kill Bill films, he started a public campaign trying to get Eon to hire him as the next director. He was a massive fan of Brosnan's Bond and wanted to make a faithful adaptation. But so faithful, in fact, it would be a period piece set in the 1950s, filmed in black and white, yet still star Pierce Brosnan. Tarantino and Brosnan pitched this to Eon, but they couldn't get on board with the idea. Tarantino then offered to buy the rights. Eon had been trying to make this film since the 60s and had just gotten the rights to do so. They were not about to throw in the cards after all this time. To this day, Tarantino is bitter about being passed up, claiming he was the only reason Casino Royale was made.
The reason they did Casino Royale all comes down to me. I had made it a point that I said I wanted to do Casino Royale. They were already on record as saying that the movie was unfilmable. But then after I said it and talked about it for a little bit, then the big thing on all the internets was that was what the fans wanted to see. And so that's when maybe it's not so unfilmable.
Well, he always did have an inflated opinion of himself.
In October of 2004, Brosnan's contract wasn't renewed.
Don't say it. The writing's on the wall.
And in February of 2005, Casino Royale was announced as the 21st Bond film. Inspired by the currently in production Batman Begins, Eon took on the idea of reimagining a franchise film, starting from scratch and ditching the continuity, aka a reboot. If you ever wondered where that craze started, look no further than these 2 films. Though the one carryover would be Judi Dench, because...
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
Exactly. Crash writer and 2-time Academy Award winner Paul Haggis joined returning screenwriters Purvis and Wade to adapt the book. They loved the chance to write the first Bond film with an actual character arc, something that James Bond had never experienced in his 20 previous films. Eon also brought back Martin Campbell to direct because of how well he revamped Bond in GoldenEye. In what turned out to be a short casting process, Eon only screen tested a handful of actors, one being Henry Cavill, deemed too young, and only one was offered the role. In October of 2005, Eon found their 007 in British actor Daniel Craig. Craig was obviously a wild card of a choice, an unconventional looking chap who was far more a diamond in the rough compared to the movie star looks of Pierce Brosnan or Sean Connery. Known mostly in the US for playing Weasley bad guys, across the pond, Craig had been proving himself a worthy Bond on TV, and especially in Matthew Vaughn's Layer Cake.
I mean, I f***ing hate guns. Although that one is really pretty. Is that Second World War?
Hey, point it upwards, sir.
Barbara Broccoli actually had her eyes on him since 1998's Elizabeth, as he exuded not just cool confidence, but the malice of a trained killer, which would be a stark contrast to his predecessors. Craig already feared the loss of anonymity and the curse of typecasting, but the reaction to him earning the role was brutal. In what would sadly become the norm, Craig was dragged through the mud by fans. They couldn't possibly accept a blue-eyed, blonde-haired Bond. His official announcement press conference didn't help either. Arriving via a naval escort, sporting long locks, a skinny frame, and a grumpy attitude towards reporters, he appeared more villain than Bond. Throughout production and up to release, infamous sites like CraigNotBond.com would continually spread rumors and general hate towards the actor.
You know, when Sean Connery was hired, everyone said, oh, disaster, because it wasn't David Niven.
They'll print anything these days.
44 years toiling in development hell, Casino Royale finally earned its license to thrill. Eon's commitment to a rougher, stripped-down Bond encompassed action scenes and stunts performed practically, with little green screen or CGI to be found. And as filming went on, Eon knew that they were absolutely right choosing Daniel Craig. He related to this disconnected, emotionally charged version of 007, and he used the bad press to fuel his performance. And he took it upon himself to make sure the film was true to that character, even if that meant arguing with Martin Campbell's choices. They had troubles getting an Aston Martin to flip, and Campbell agonized over how to film an hours-long poker game, cashing in on Texas Hold'em's rising competitive scene, and seeing as it was more widely known than Baccarat.
When you film one person, you've got to film the other person. It's got to look like they're both looking at each other. And invariably, at some point, somebody will look at each other and it won't look like they're looking at each other. Now, add to that the fact is they've got cards in front of them and a pile of chips, which every time you cut to them on a continuity level has to be accurate.
But that aside, production was as smooth as a Vesper martini.
You know, that's not half bad.
Casino Royale raised the stakes on November 17th, 2006. Immediately being hailed as one of the best Bond films ever made, if not the greatest. Smart, intense, and faithful to the novel, the film reinvents James Bond for the 21st century, where his ego, recklessness, and misogyny are character flaws, not features. And the much-feared Daniel Craig performance showed depths never before seen in 007. Dangerous, yet vulnerable. The haters pretty much shut up after opening weekend, and the film's pot grew to a franchise record of $606 million worldwide. It took 53 years from page to screen before Casino Royale had a proper adaptation. But Eon Productions did so with style, finesse, and for the first time in its history, elevated the series to prestige filmmaking. Modernized and popular again, Craig's reign alone has amassed over $3 billion. And while his time as 007 has come to an end, a new James Bond will always return, in whatever form, as Eon has done 5 times before. And it's a good thing too, because after Amazon purchased MGM in 2021, 007 will have to face their first real-world Bond villain, a maniacal, balding billionaire hell-bent on world domination and beyond. No, not that one.
I want to go on this flight because it's a big deal for me.
See it with our own eyes. I'd like to roll the tape.
God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.